So folk, as I've explained to you before, socialists are very good at making things up as they go along. It doesn't matter whether you're talking about economics or history in general, the myth of the robber barons or something to do with the Great Depression or any other period of history where socialists come out and say, oh, there was a dangerous concentration of wealth in the hands of the few, and if it's no that, they're saying, capitalism's responsible for monopolies, etc, etc. And if it's no something like that, they're saying that there's unregulated markets that caused the 2008 financial crisis, right? You understand the point. Socialists love to make baseless claims and have never get anything to back it up with. You take, for example, the myth on monopolies and that, but they can't actually give you an example where an actual free market led to that. Instead, they move the goalposts and then try to pass off capitalism as corporatism, and then they try to claim that corporatism exists because of capitalism. And if they're not doing something like that, they're trying to move the goalpost and redefine socialism. Time and time again, I've explained this. There is no such thing as socialism being decentralised, right? It's a complete opposite meaning of socialism. And there's no such thing as socialism having personal ownership of possessions. Again, that's a contradiction of socialism. These are the type of people that love to just make things up as they go along. In other words, they prey on the type of people who don't know any better. They've not got a clue about economics, they haven't got a clue about history, and they prove that every single time. So I was requested to respond on Vaush, the debate you had with Sargon of Akkad, if you could even try to call that a debate. And if it wasn't Sargon and it was somebody like, Count Dankula, surprise, surprise, it was the usual nonsense where he's projecting things off onto them and calling them names and trying to make them out as if they're, liars and whatever, and saying, oh well, he is a Nazi and a white supremacist and all this crap, right? I mean, this is what you're dealing with. For a video that I've been requested to respond on relative to Vaush, and I've done a few before, which was on something to do with Thomas Sowell. Now, of course, he didn't even bother to read any of Thomas Sowell's work, and he was heavily critical of him. And I think he's somebody that considers himself the oxymoronic market socialist. It's basically a socialist that's conceded that socialism doesn't work. So in other words, they need to cling on for their dear life to an element of what capitalism is, and then they try to say, oh well, that's not got anything to do with capital, it bloody well is. In his theoretical fantasy world, away in the deluded fantasy world, he thinks he can have, no government with socialism and all this crap. Besides the point, I was requested to do this video response. You're bound to come across these baseless claims. Let's have a listen to what his take on freedom is.
My vision of a good world is not dictated by what do you want? Ultimate freedom to enslave and oppress your fellow human? No.
Folks, this is exactly what I mean about, making things up as they go along. They try to redefine things. You take the word slavery as an example, and their main influence, the likes of Noam Chomsky, where he made up this argument on wage slavery. All they've done is they've basically redefined the entire meaning of the word. Slavery basically means that you're forced against your will, and what I mean by forced, I mean you're literally forced. You've got balls and chains around your ankles and all sorts. And if you don't do it, then you're whipped and all sorts, right? How these folk draw to the logical conclusion that if you don't work for, a private company in some sort of capitalist system, then of course it somehow means that you're left there to starve to death. You need to work for a living in any system. I mean, how the hell do they think food is transported? How the hell do they think food is made? Do they think it just magically appears there on the shelves? They're so infantile, and it's the same way the argument on energy or any other sector of the economy. If you're applying for a job and you're going through a job interview process, that isn't slavery. That's something that you call consensual. It's contractual, and you have the freedom to leave that company any time you want. So let's have a listen to what else he's got to say.
My vision of a good world is one where people are free, and the positive freedom you claim to value is the freedom to live life outside the pressures of an autocratic economic system.
So he mentioned there about, the positive freedom and all the rest of this, and I suppose you could throw in there with the positive rights, negative rights. You're talking about using the will of a so-called collective, enforcing it or the other. Collectivism in general basically is slavery, which is laughable, because you're stripping the individual of their individual liberty and rights. You're forcing them into a collective group against their will, taking away their right to disagree. It's a bit like someone who turns around and says to you, oh well, guess what, a job is a right, so where's the right of the employer to disagree with you? So in other words, he basically wants to use the means of force against you to take away your rights and liberty to own your own private business or your own private land, etc. He's basically defining exactly which is the opposite of freedom. The word control is the antithesis of liberty. Was he insinuating, because he's said before, I think, that he's a so-called anarchist? If you've got no private ownership, you've got no secure private property rights. Let's say you've got any sort of personal possession that you own, and if somebody tries to steal your goods, you've got your secure private property rights there to define what's yours. And if somebody tries to steal it, you can take them to court. It's to define individual ownership. It's relative to today with capitalism. So that means all personal ownership of possessions is relative to capitalism. It's the complete opposite meaning of the entire meaning of socialism with communal ownership. How the hell can you have personal ownership of possessions without your secure private property rights? You can't, because it's your secure private property rights that is there to outline and define that you own it. If you don't have your individual rights, you can't protect individual ownership. And that is the fact that these people haven't got the common sense and intelligence to even understand. So everything's a contradiction when he talks about freedom. He's not in favour of freedom at all. In his argument, he wants to remove private ownership of property. That means taking away your liberty through the means of force, and it requires a government in order to do so. And they will never give you an answer how the state is just going to magically wither away. They just come out with all the piffle and all the idealism. If there was no private ownership of businesses and there was no secure private property rights, and let's just magically say that there was no government, and you go down the road of 65 million people, well, how then are they going to stop individuals going and doing their own thing? And somehow it's through what he calls positive freedom. It's just like that argument with positive rights, where they use the means of force against you. Take for argument's sake, if somebody turns around and says to you, I have a right to a job, so you've got a right to take away the liberty of another individual, do you? Take away the liberty of an individual to disagree with you. So an employer no longer has a right to disagree with the employee. Positive rights isn't even equal either, folk. Equal rights is where you've got the negative rights. You've got the freedom to agree to disagree with one another. That's what equality really is. It's just like their claim of claiming a right to healthcare, but they have to use the means of force against others to pay for it. How the hell did they draw to the logical conclusion that the word force became freedom? Their idea is that, oh well, if you don't have that means of force, then somehow people are left starving and are left without, and they come out with, and again it goes back to the initial point that I was saying, the baseless claims pulled out of thin air, where they say, oh, if you don't have, government run healthcare, then it won't be affordable for the masses. It would only be affordable for the rich. You see where this argument's gone. It's all baseless claims filled with absolute nonsense, because they don't even understand a single thing of what they're even going on about.
And what is 80 to 100 hours work week but autocratic? What freedom is there in a life where you work 14 hours a day? There is no freedom. So, folk, he's making up a load of nonsense as far as I'm concerned. I mean, if you're working that many hours and that's against the law, and even then, wasn't it done to government's legislation that your work week hours reduced? It's like I says, machines and automation enabled you to mass produce. It greatly reduced your work week hours because, machines were able to do stuff. You're able to multitask and do all sorts, and through economies of scale, you saw mass production. Companies were able to cut their costs, and they're able to do stuff quicker, and it freed up time for people to do other types of jobs. See, if there's companies that are honestly, forcing that upon you, then that is against the law. So I don't even know where he goes with that argument. And if he's talking about in a capitalist system, you just wouldn't get away with that. People have their individual rights. It's these baseless claims about capitalism, about free markets and stuff like that. He just insinuates and then claims that's what it is. Even in a free market anyhow, you've got the freedom to simply leave those type of companies, go work for somebody else. It happens to be through the real world of socialism that you end up down that road, where you end up working endless hours and get paid practically nothing. No matter how voluntary that exchange, no matter your right to leave that job, no matter your right to pack up your things and leave, there is no freedom in that job.
What the hell is he talking about? Of course, if you're working for somebody else's company, you've got to abide by their rules. It's their company. They created it. There's nothing stopping you from leaving it and going and starting up your own private business and doing your own thing. You have the freedom to do so, just as you had the freedom to contractually agree to work for the company. He wants to take away private individuals' rights. So it's a bit like me as a photographer. You wouldn't have the freedom to be an individual working in your own company. According to him, he would take all that away for you. It doesn't even matter if you're a programmer or a graphic designer, whatever the hell you're. And as far as I'm concerned, in his idealistic world of so-called freedom, you wouldn't have the freedom to even own your own private company. And he calls himself a market socialist, which is just laughable because everything they do with the market's basically capitalism. He held it there in a nutshell, conceding about, private company owners and saying you've got no freedom. So in other words, he's insinuating he just wants to get rid of private individual ownership. Somehow the workers will own the workplace. Load of piffle. Never existed in world recorded history. If you want to go on about Mondragon, they're operating right under that of a capitalist structure with a price structure system and everything. So if you get rid of that, you'd be screwed.
The freedom you're fighting for is a fake freedom. A freedom to control and dominate others for wealth.
And down the road of his scenario, as I says, his version just so happens to be in the real world slavery, because he wouldn't avoid totalitarianism with socialism. Try to take away the liberty of an individual, well, what do you expect is going to happen? You require dictatorship to hold it in place. That's why Karl Marx argued, you require the dictatorship of the proletariat. Even Karl Marx was forced into that concession.
The freedom I'm advocating for, if you would just pay your taxes, is the freedom for human beings to live a life that would have been considered utopian to humans 100 years ago.
Rather quite funny that is, because through all these socialist government interventionism and the higher taxes, they've been crippling countries like Scandinavian countries such as Norway, Sweden and Denmark, etc. There's Sweden sitting there with an unemployment rate more than 3 times higher than their official figures, sitting with a severe lack of productivity, and they're not a sustainable economy in the long term. Because as far as I'm concerned, when you look at American history, the American consumer was far better off prior to 1900, and that was because of the crippling government intervention in the taxes, etc. So there you go. Now I'm not saying there wasn't taxes before then, because you had the protection of tariffs and what have you. The American people were certainly better off. He doesn't even understand what freedom is. Basically concedes that it requires the use of force, and then he tries to pass that off as freedom folk. And it apparently forcing people against their will and taking away their liberty is somehow the argument of true freedom. Aye, right, yeah. Anyway, folk, you've probably got something you want to add in. Feel free to comment in the comment section below. Be sure to like the video, share the video, and of course, cheers for watching.